Most people believe wars are won by the strongest armies, the biggest guns, or the loudest explosions. But that belief collapses the moment you hear the real World War II story of Thomas Callahan. Nothing about his journey fits the usual image people have of heroes from the Pacific War. While some saw only dense jungle and danger, he saw patterns. While others trusted equipment, he trusted thinking. And while many believed technology alone wins battles, Callahan proved that a human mind, guided by courage and creativity, is more powerful than any arsenal. That's why his legendary soup can trick is still studied today in courses on military deception, sniper doctrine, and psychological warfare. What's fascinating is that no one would ever imagine a simple piece of trash, a dented soup can, could become a weapon capable of taking down 112 Japanese soldiers in only 5 days. It sounds exaggerated, impossible, almost mythical. But the deeper you dive into this untold World War II story, the more you realize the truth is far more powerful than fiction. Callahan's genius wasn't in pulling the trigger, it was in seeing the battlefield through a lens most people don't possess. He understood that Japanese snipers, disciplined, dangerous, and trained to notice everything, relied on conditioned reflexes. And if you can predict human reactions, you can control them. That is the heart of tactical innovation, turning behavior into opportunity. And that's exactly what he did. In the middle of the U.S. Marines' Pacific Theater, where every tree could hide death and every wrong step could be the last, Callahan created something the world had never witnessed. He took the logic behind counter-sniper operations and flipped it upside down. Instead of hiding forever, waiting for the perfect shot, he invited the enemy to look. Instead of avoiding sunlight, he weaponized it. Instead of simply firing, he started thinking. That's how the boy from Montana became one of the most studied names in Marine Corps history. Not for how many shots he fired, but for the impact his ideas had on innovation in warfare. And there is a deeper lesson here, perhaps the most important one. You don't need the best tools when you become the best user of whatever tools you have. In a war where long-range shooting WWII seemed to depend on perfect optics and advanced gear, Callahan showed that sniper versus sniper combat is, above all, a contest of intelligence. He reminded the world that improvisation can beat discipline, perception can overpower force, and even improvised weapons can reshape an entire battlefield when placed in the hands of someone bold enough to think differently. What makes this story even more powerful is that it didn't begin with some elaborate strategy or a room full of commanders. It began with loss, silence, and a spark of insight reflected off the metal of a discarded can. And once you see how that single moment ignited one of the greatest individual feats in military history, a feat that changed not only tactics, but the very meaning of victory, you'll understand why the story of Thomas Callahan isn't just about war, it's about vision. And that vision leads us straight into the first chapter of this extraordinary journey. In the thick, humid stillness before sunrise, when the jungle feels like it's holding its breath, something extraordinary begins to unfold. And it doesn't start with an explosion or a loud command, but with a quiet Marine studying the faintest sliver of sunlight. Thomas Callahan wasn't the kind of man who waited for perfect conditions. He created them. That moment on Bougainville, 1943, with mist curling like ghosts between the trees, becomes the stage where a single Marine uses nothing more than instinct, discipline, and pure American ingenuity in war to reshape what sniper WWII combat would one day become. While most soldiers were trained to trust their gear, he trusted his mind. And that single difference fueled the soon-to-be legendary soup can trick, a move that would ripple through Marine Corps history as one of the most unexpected innovations in warfare. As he aligned his scope that morning, he didn't just see a battlefield, He saw patterns, weaknesses, and opportunities hiding beneath the chaos. Growing up reading the land like a second language, spotting micro-movements across the killing field felt as natural as breathing. That's what set him apart. His deep sense of war psychology, his ability to anticipate enemy behavior long before they made a sound. Every time Callahan adjusted his spring field, he wasn't preparing for a simple shot. He was fine-tuning a lesson in military deception, turning the terrain itself into an improvised weapon. And while other Marines fought the Pacific War with fire and steel, he fought it with insight, turning the U.S. Marines Pacific Theater into a classroom where he taught the enemy an unforgettable lesson. Curiosity doesn't just kill the cat, it can dismantle entire tactics. That first flash of reflected sunlight wasn't luck, it was calculation, patience, and raw tactical innovation wrapped into one daring experiment. Japanese snipers trained their whole lives to recognize motion, shadow, and sound. But Thomas Callahan forced them to confront something entirely different, their own instincts. And when that instinct pulled the first soldier's head above the sandbags, Callahan was already waiting, steady as stone, rewriting sniper doctrine with a single, perfectly placed round. This was sniper versus sniper at its purest, not a battle of rifles, but a battle of minds. His long-range shooting WWII expertise wasn't just about accuracy. It was about timing, about shaping the battlefield so the enemy had only two choices: reveal themselves and die, or hesitate and lose the fight. That opening kill wasn't just the first shot of the day. It was the ignition point of one of the most legendary sniper stories the Pacific War would ever witness. From that moment forward, every soldier in the sector, American and Japanese, felt the tension shift. Marines whispered about the real WWII story unfolding beside them. Japanese observers grew jittery, scanning for threats where none existed, and Callahan was standing in the center of it all, calm, focused, already crafting new counter-sniper operations with nothing but a few cans, a rifle, and an imagination sharpened by years of hunting. And as that first soldier fell, Callahan understood something deeper. This wasn't just a victory. It was proof that the battlefield rewards those bold enough to look at a problem sideways, a truth that would only become clearer when we step back into his past, into the training and instincts that shaped him long before the first shot was ever fired.
He didn't become a legend overnight. Thomas Callahan was shaped long before the Pacific War, long before Bougainville, 1943, long before anyone whispered his name in stories of sniper World War II heroism. Growing up in the quiet mountains of Montana, he learned early that the world doesn't always shout its lessons. Sometimes it whispers them through wind patterns, animal tracks, or the subtle weight of silence. While other kids learned chores, he learned patience. While others rushed their shots, he learned restraint. That's why battlefield ingenuity came so naturally to him. He wasn't just good with a rifle, he understood how the world moved, breathed, and reacted. That awareness would later become the backbone of the soup can trick, a tactic rooted not in luck, but in a lifetime of noticing what others ignored. By the time he enlisted in the Scout Sniper Marine Corps program, instructors often paused just to watch him shoot, equal parts impressed and curious. He didn't simply fire his weapon, he studied everything around it. Every gust of wind, every flicker of light, every shifting shadow became a teacher. His trainers quickly realized he wasn't there just to master sniper tactics, he was there to redefine them. That's why long-range shooting World War II came to him so naturally, and why counter-sniper operations would later become the arenas where he excelled. What felt complex to others felt like a solvable puzzle to him. And as he learned the Marine Corps history of snipers who came before him, he quietly made himself a promise. He wouldn't repeat the past, he'd improve it. Most soldiers learned how to shoot. Callahan's training taught him how to think. He absorbed war psychology like a sponge, fascinated not by the bullet itself, but by the mind behind it. His instructors drilled into him the importance of unpredictability, never allowing Japanese snipers to read his patterns or habits. He took that lesson to heart with a seriousness that bordered on obsession. It shaped everything: his timing, his breathing, his posture, even the rhythm of his stillness. While others practiced hitting targets, he practiced awareness. He asked himself the questions most shooters never considered. What makes the enemy curious? What makes them afraid? What forces them to investigate? These weren't questions of marksmanship. They were the building blocks of psychological warfare and military deception, the very foundations of the sniper doctrine he would later revolutionize. As he advanced through training, instructors shared untold World War II stories, accounts of snipers who outsmarted entire units using nothing but improvised weapons and tactical innovation. Callahan didn't treat these tales as distant legends. He treated them as challenges. He believed every real World War II story held a principle waiting to be refined. While classmates obsessed over tight shot groupings, he focused on turning the battlefield itself into a tool. Mud, leaves, sound, anything could become an advantage in the right hands. That creativity, that quiet refusal to accept limitations, became the spark that ignited one of the most legendary sniper stories ever recorded. His mindset didn't come from ego, it came from clarity. Callahan understood something most people never realize. People don't lose because they're weak, they lose because they're predictable. And on a battlefield dominated by Japanese snipers trained to punish hesitation, predictability was death. So he made himself a vow. He would never fight the same fight twice. He would force the enemy to play his game, not theirs. This philosophy, this belief in American ingenuity in war, is what he carried into Bougainville. And he had no idea that this mindset was already preparing him for a tragedy that would reshape everything he thought he knew, pushing him toward the breakthrough that would change warfare forever.
There are moments in life when the entire world goes silent, not because everything is calm, but because something inside you fractures. For Thomas Callahan, that silence arrived the day Corporal Rivera, his spotter, his brother-in-arms, the man who shared every risk in the U.S. Marines Pacific Theater, fell to a single, perfectly placed shot from Japanese snipers hidden deep in the jungle canopy. The Pacific War had already shown him cruelty, but this moment carved itself into him like broken glass. Sniper WWII combat wasn't just a test of skill, it was sniper versus sniper at its most unforgiving. As he knelt beside Rivera's body, Callahan felt grief, anger, and responsibility mix into something heavier, something that would soon push him into a level of battlefield ingenuity few soldiers would ever reach. Callahan didn't rush into the jungle seeking revenge. He didn't scream, didn't fire blindly, didn't lose control. Instead, he became still, the way a seasoned hunter freezes when the forest shifts in a way only he can sense. He studied every tree, every angle, every shadow where military deception might hide a rifle barrel. He wasn't just looking for the sniper who killed Rivera, he was searching for the flaw in the enemy's doctrine. And in that intense silence, he realized something profound. The Japanese sniper wasn't unstoppable. He was simply disciplined. And discipline, in war psychology, creates patterns, and patterns can be weaponized. That realization became the spark that would ignite one of the untold WWII stories in Marine Corps history. Later that night, back in his foxhole, Callahan opened a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup, the only warm comfort he had left in a world suddenly stripped of familiarity. As he turned it in his hand, a fading beam of sunset hit the metal and sent a thin flash across the jungle. He froze. That glint traveled farther than any mirror he'd ever seen. He angled the can again, another flash. In that instant, the soup can trick wasn't born from creativity alone. It came from necessity, grief, and the kind of tactical innovation that surfaces only when a man refuses to let loss be the final word. Improvised weapons weren't rare in WW2, but using sunlight as bait? That bordered on madness. The kind Rivera himself might have grinned at before saying, "Try it, Tom. Make them look." Callahan spent the night experimenting with angles, replaying the habits of Japanese snipers in his mind. They were trained to investigate every anomaly, every glint, every whisper of movement. Their discipline, their greatest strength, would now be the trap. He could make them curious, make them lean forward, make them shift just enough for his long-range shooting WW2 precision to do the rest. This wasn't about firing a rifle anymore. It was about psychological warfare, born from a simple observation. Marine Corps history would one day remember this moment as the beginning of a revolution in sniper doctrine. But to Callahan, it was simpler than that. It was a promise whispered to Rivera in the dark: "Your death will not be wasted." When he finally presented the idea, turning literal trash into tactical innovation, the room went quiet, not in mockery, but in consideration. Because every Marine in that tent understood something Callahan now embodied. Real WW2 stories aren't written by those who follow the pattern, but by those who shatter it. The officers approved his plan, though some still couldn't wrap their minds around it. But they trusted him. They trusted the spark of American ingenuity in war that burned behind his calm expression. And Callahan walked out knowing this was just the beginning. The cans were ready. The sun would rise again, and the Japanese snipers, masters of shadow and silence, were about to meet a new kind of threat, one crafted from grief, clarity, and the unwavering will of a Marine who refused to be predictable.
The first morning he deployed the cans, the jungle had no idea it was about to witness something entirely new, a kind of tactical innovation that didn't come from laboratories, command centers, or military engineers, but from a single Marine who refused to accept defeat. Thomas Callahan moved before dawn, placing each can the way someone lays down pieces of a puzzle they've already solved in their mind. Bougainville 1943 was a brutal landscape where Japanese snipers dictated the rhythm of the Pacific War. Yet here was one man quietly rewriting the script using nothing but sunlight and conviction. As the first beams broke through the canopy, those metallic glints danced across enemy positions like whispered messages, and the battlefield ingenuity behind the soup can trick began to take shape. He wasn't just signaling, he was provoking, studying, shaping behavior, engaging in psychological warfare long before anyone realized what he was doing. From his hidden nest, he watched the Japanese lines with the same patience he'd learned while hunting in Montana. He knew Japanese snipers weren't reckless. They were observant, disciplined, and trained to interpret the smallest anomalies. But that discipline worked in his favor. And that's why this real WW2 story almost feels poetic. When the first soldier stepped forward, binoculars raised toward those strange flashes, Callahan was already steady behind his scope. His shot wasn't just precise, it was symbolic. It marked the moment when military deception became a weapon more powerful than brute force. Word spread quickly through the Marines. Someone had discovered a way to beat the enemy at their own sniper versus sniper game. That rumor shifted the atmosphere within the U.S. Marines Pacific Theater, replacing hesitation with hope. And where hope grows, momentum follows. But Callahan didn't stop after one success. He pushed further. He punched holes into certain cans, coated others with mud, and experimented with angles that created distinct patterns of reflected light. What looked like a simple trick on the surface was actually a sophisticated lesson in war psychology. He wanted Japanese observers to second-guess themselves, to question their instincts, to break their rhythm. That's the heart of counter-sniper operations. You don't just eliminate the threat, you dismantle the mindset behind it. Sniper WW2 manuals had never imagined using improvised weapons like these. Yet here he was, crafting sniper doctrine from literal trash.
In a war full of tanks, artillery, and heavy weaponry, this was a humbling reminder that sometimes the smallest objects carry the greatest potential for innovation in warfare when placed in the right hands. As the day went on, Japanese forces grew increasingly unsettled. They fired mortars into empty clearings, confused by flashes that appeared and vanished with no discernible pattern. Their frustration was visible even from a distance. This was the beauty of tactical innovation. By forcing the enemy into a reactive mindset, Callahan gained control not only over where they looked, but how they thought. And as more kills were confirmed, as more scouts fell victim to curiosity, the Marines watching realized they were witnessing more than a clever trick. They were witnessing the birth of one of the most legendary sniper stories ever recorded. Officers began pulling Callahan aside, not only to praise him, but to understand him. They wanted to know how he thought, how he predicted movement, how he merged instinct with calculation to master long-range shooting WWII conditions like almost no one else. By the end of the second day, Callahan had done more than disrupt enemy lines. He had altered the psychology of an entire sector. Japanese snipers who once dominated the battlefield now hesitated, scanning the tree line with fear rather than confidence. Marines reported fewer casualties. Observers noted shifts in enemy posture. The momentum was changing, and Callahan felt it. Yet he also knew the enemy wasn't finished adapting. This early success wasn't a conclusion, it was an opening chapter. Deep down, he sensed something approaching, something bigger and more dangerous, a test that would demand even more creativity from him. And that test would soon arrive in the form of a sniper so skilled, so elusive, that normal tactics simply wouldn't be enough.
There comes a moment in every great journey when the path narrows, the stakes rise, and a single decision becomes the dividing line between survival and defeat. For Thomas Callahan, that moment arrived when he realized the mounting Marine casualties weren't the work of scattered Japanese snipers, but of one exceptional marksman, a ghost in the treetops who had mastered the Pacific War's deadliest art. This wasn't just sniper WW2 combat. This was sniper versus sniper at its highest expression, a duel between two minds who understood that victory belonged not to the fastest trigger, but to the sharpest observer. While most Marines saw only a distant tree, Callahan studied its subtle shifts, its unnatural stillness, the quiet war psychology written into its branches. And deep down, he knew this elite sniper wouldn't fall for a simple flash of light. The soup can trick had been effective, but this opponent demanded something far more intricate, far more daring, something worthy of true tactical innovation. Callahan spent hours analyzing that tree, mapping possible sightlines and the rhythm of enemy fire. This Japanese marksman wasn't reckless. He was methodical, disciplined, and frighteningly patient. He shifted firing positions within the same tree, using layers of concealment with a mastery that would echo through Marine Corps history as an extraordinary level of skill. This was no ordinary adversary. This was a lesson in battlefield ingenuity and military deception wearing the uniform of the enemy. Yet instead of fearing him, Callahan respected him because he understood that facing someone this capable meant rising beyond technique and stepping fully into creativity. So he conceived a bold idea. Instead of drawing the sniper's attention toward him, he would create a world of false importance somewhere else. He would build a deception so convincing that even the most disciplined Japanese sniper couldn't resist investigating it. That idea became the command post gambit, a move so brilliant that instructors would later teach it as one of the untold WW2 stories that rewrote sniper doctrine. The plan seemed simple on paper, but was remarkably sophisticated in execution. With help from his team, Callahan staged a fake American forward command post, radios, map cases, coordinated movements, everything crafted to look convincingly real. Then he positioned cans to mimic communication flashes between this decoy post and the front lines, transforming improvised weapons into instruments of psychological warfare. Japanese observers, trained to identify patterns and intercept American intentions, couldn't ignore such a display. It was irresistible intelligence. Callahan knew the elite sniper's discipline had helped him dominate the battlefield, but now that same discipline would pull him out of hiding. This wasn't just long-range shooting WWII anymore. It was chess disguised as sunlight and shadow. And every move Callahan made nudged the elite sniper one square closer to checkmate. When movement finally stirred in the branches, Callahan felt the air shift. His breathing slowed, his senses sharpened. The elite sniper had taken the bait, not recklessly, but with the calculated curiosity of a man who believed he'd uncovered a vulnerability. Through a narrow gap in the foliage, Callahan saw the subtle darkening that signaled a body repositioning behind the leaves. Then came the barrel, a thin glint of steel, steady and deliberate. This was the moment their two worlds collided. Two snipers shaped by different cultures, different philosophies, different landscapes, yet bound by the same understanding of silence, timing, and danger. For all the talk of American ingenuity in war, for all the later praise surrounding the soup can trick, this moment distilled everything down to one truth. Innovation only matters if you have the courage to trust it under fire. Callahan exhaled, adjusted for wind, and let instinct and training merge into one. The bullet cut across 712 yards of human jungle air, a journey lasting barely 2 seconds, yet echoing as one of the most legendary sniper stories ever recorded. When the elite sniper's body tumbled through the branches, crashing from platform to platform, something larger than victory settled over the battlefield. Marines later said they felt the shift instantly, as if a shadow had lifted. Enemy fire decreased, movement patterns changed. Japanese troops, once emboldened by the invisible guardian watching over them, now appeared shaking, uncertain, exposed. But Callahan didn't celebrate. If anything, his focus sharpened. Because eliminating the elite sniper didn't end the war, it merely opened the next chapter. And he knew that Japanese would adapt, forcing him to evolve once again, pushing this real WWII story into an even more complex phase.
When the elite sniper fell, Callahan knew the victory wouldn't last long. In war, especially in the Pacific War, the enemy is always learning, always adapting, and Japanese snipers were no exception. Almost immediately, the pattern shifted. No more quick reactions to strange flashes, no more curious scouts peeking from the tree line. They had finally realized something was wrong. But here's the truth Callahan understood better than most. When the enemy stops playing your game, it's time to invent a new one. That's the essence of tactical innovation. And it was in this moment that his battlefield ingenuity truly began to shine. With the soup can trick exposed, Callahan didn't panic. Instead, he studied their new behavior, noticing how hesitation created cracks in their own sniper doctrine. They were trying to avoid being deceived, but that caution slowed their intelligence gathering, and that was exactly the weakness he needed. So he expanded the strategy, placing more cans, creating new angles, and designing elaborate patterns that resembled real American communication signals. What started as improvised weapons quickly evolved into a full-scale military deception network, convincing the enemy that major troop movements were underway. And the best part? They had no choice but to investigate. Not out of curiosity, but because their war psychology demanded it. This shift sparked some of the most untold World War II stories from Bougainville, 1943. Japanese observers became torn between fear and duty, uncertain whether the flashes were traps or vital intelligence they were obligated to report. Every second of hesitation created opportunities for counter-sniper operations, and Callahan never wasted a single one.
His sniper WW2 instincts, combined with his scout sniper Marine Corps discipline, made him a force the enemy couldn't predict. He wasn't just out shooting them, he was out thinking them. Each kill deepened the psychological warfare spreading through their ranks. Soldiers whispering about demon lights, officers unsure whether to press forward or fall back. The battlefield itself had become his weapon. By now, Marines across the U.S. Marines Pacific Theater could see exactly what was happening. Callahan wasn't just eliminating threats, he was reshaping the entire fight. Enemy mortars fell on empty clearings. Patrols moved in nervous, hesitant patterns. Even experienced Japanese snipers began avoiding specific sectors altogether. And yet, Callahan sensed that this was only the beginning, because once an enemy adapts out of fear, they eventually adapt out of strategy. And that next evolution would demand even more creativity from him. He could feel the tide turning again, preparing him for a day that would surpass everything he had accomplished so far.
There are days in war that don't just change the course of a battle, they change the course of a man. For Thomas Callahan, November 13th became exactly that kind of day. The moment when preparation, instinct, tactical innovation, and pure American ingenuity in war collided into a single unstoppable force. With Japanese forces shaken and unsure whether the light signals were real or deception, he recognized a powerful truth. Hesitation is the sharpest weapon on the battlefield. And that morning, hesitation spread their Japanese ranks like fog rolling through the jungle. Callahan saw it, felt it, and used it, because a sniper who understands war psychology doesn't simply shoot, he shapes behavior. And on that day, he shaped everything. He expanded the soup can trick to an entirely new level, orchestrating light patterns so complex that even seasoned Japanese snipers couldn't determine whether they were observing communication lines or traps. This wasn't improvised weapons anymore. It was a full symphony of military deception tuned to the heartbeat of the Pacific War. Every flash, every angle, every flicker of reflected sunlight became a message, not to the Marines, but to the instincts of the enemy. While the Japanese wrestled with confusion, Callahan remained poised behind his rifle, embodying the Scout Sniper Marine Corps principle that says the best shot isn't the fastest, it's the one delivered when the enemy cannot defend themselves. And one by one, across the open ground of Bougainville 1943, sunlit glimpses of helmets, binoculars, and exposed shoulders became opportunities he executed with relentless precision. Marine observers would later say it felt like watching sniper doctrine evolve in real time. Callahan recorded 27 confirmed kills that day, a number so staggering it became one of the most legendary sniper stories in Marine Corps history. But the number itself wasn't what mattered. What mattered was why those kills happened. The Japanese weren't simply outgunned, they were psychologically cornered. Their discipline, once their greatest advantage, had become their downfall. They feared the flashes but feared ignoring them even more. Their officers no longer knew whether to give orders or hide. Their scouts hesitated at the tree line, torn between duty and survival. This is what psychological warfare looks like when mastered by someone who understands the mind as deeply as the rifle. The battlefield had become a mirror, reflecting their panic back at them. Diaries recovered later revealed the depth of that psychological collapse. Phrases like demon lights, ghost signals, and the Americans control the sun. To Callahan, these weren't trophies. They were signs that the real World War II story unfolding around him was bigger than lethality. It was about controlling tempo, perception, and courage. The enemy wasn't losing because they lacked skill. They were losing because they no longer trusted their own senses. And a sniper who robs his opponent of trust has already won. Even across the U.S. Marines Pacific Theater, Marines felt the shift. Men who once advanced with caution now moved confidently, knowing the jungle's deadliest threat, Japanese snipers, were tangled in fear, doubt, and confusion. Yet despite the transformation he caused that day, Callahan didn't view it as a final victory. If anything, it sharpened his awareness. He knew Japanese command wouldn't allow panic to govern their troops for long. They would reorganize, rethink, and respond. And when they did, the battlefield would shift again. He could feel the next stage forming, something larger, more intricate, perhaps even more dangerous. The soup can trick had reached new heights, but there were still moves to make, still deceptions to weave, still challenges waiting on the horizon. And the next challenge would demand even more creativity. When a man discovers that his creativity works better than any weapon, he begins to see the battlefield in ways most people never will. That's exactly what happened to Thomas Callahan when he realized that the enemy, even terrified, even shaken, was still searching for patterns. And if they were still searching, they could still be manipulated. So he took the boldest step of the entire operation. He multiplied the chaos. Instead of 5 or 6 cans, he scattered more than 20, each one positioned like a precise move in a grand invisible chess game. The Pacific War had never seen anything like it. A single Marine transforming scrap metal into strategy, reflections into communication, sunlight into fear. Bougainville, 1943, became the living stage for one of the greatest demonstrations of innovation in warfare ever recorded. These cans worked like a network of false signals, creating the illusion that the Marines were coordinating a massive offensive. Every flash echoed another, as if entire battalions were moving in perfect synchronization. The real WWII story behind that day is so extraordinary that Marine Corps history scholars still analyze the reports, trying to understand how something so simple devastated a force so disciplined. But Callahan understood a truth few grasp. Japanese snipers needed to believe they were one step ahead, and so he guided them, gently, invisibly, right where he wanted them, into psychological terrain they had never navigated before. Meanwhile, counter-sniper operations became deadlier and more efficient than ever. To the Japanese soldiers, every new reflection felt urgent, every misleading glimmer looked suspicious, every light seemed too important to ignore. The battlefield turned into a hall of mirrors where nothing could be trusted and everything might be an ambush. This kind of psychological warfare doesn't break the enemy from the outside, it unravels them from within. And on that day, any Japanese scout who dared investigate those signals was met with the unerring precision of a sniper WWII master who handled long-range shooting WWII as if you were firing at a stationary target. Callahan wasn't just eliminating enemy soldiers, he was dismantling their confidence, blinding their instincts, and eroding their sense of safety. And in sniper versus sniper combat, that is worth more than any bullet ever fired. Even Japanese officers, usually disciplined and cautious, began exposing themselves as they tried to reorganize defensive lines under the false assumption that a massive American attack was imminent. That was the turning point. The fear of an imaginary threat forced them out of fortified positions and into the open, exactly where Callahan and his team held complete control. None of it would have been possible without the improvisations he had refined over days of tension and creativity. The same improvised weapons that, to any ordinary soldier, looked like worthless trash. But in the hands of someone capable of true tactical innovation, those cans became one of the deadliest psychological tools the U.S. Marines Pacific Theater had ever used. As more officers fell, the command structure buckled and Japanese coordination dissolved into confusion. Callahan had managed to cripple an entire sector without firing a single unnecessary shot. Yet even in the face of such overwhelming success, Callahan refused to let triumph blind him. He knew the battlefield reacts like a living organism. Every action triggers a response, and the psychological collapse he had engineered would not last forever. The Japanese command would adapt again. They would recover, recalibrate, and come back with new tactics. What was coming next would demand even more intuition, even more courage, even more innovation. As dark clouds rolled over Bougainville, obscuring the sun that had served as his silent ally, Callahan sensed the shift immediately. The light was fading, and with it, the power of his elaborate illusion. A new phase was approaching, one where light could no longer be his weapon, and where another forgotten resource would soon take its place.
When we step back and look at everything Thomas Callahan accomplished, it's impossible not to feel a sense of awe. Not because of the staggering number, the 112 enemy soldiers taken down in just 5 days, but because of how it happened. The true power of this real WWII story doesn't lie in the trigger, but in the thought behind it. Callahan showed the world that war, especially in the Pacific War, has never been merely a contest of physical strength. It has always been and will always be a contest of vision. He proved that in the middle of chaos, pressure, and uncertainty, the human mind remains the most powerful tool ever carried onto a battlefield. That's how the soup can trick transformed from a simple, improvised idea into a landmark of tactical innovation, psychological warfare, and military deception. And if there's one lesson we can gather from his journey, it's that extraordinary results rarely come from obvious solutions. Sometimes they come from a dented can catching the morning sun. Sometimes they come from a single question: what hasn't been tried yet? That's where great ideas are born, in the space between fear and courage, doubt and decision. That's why Callahan is still studied in the Scout Sniper Marine Corps, referenced throughout Marine Corps history, and discussed in conversations about sniper doctrine, sniper WWII strategy, and counter-sniper operations. He teaches us that it doesn't matter if you're on Bougainville 1943 or facing your own daily challenges. Thinking differently opens doors that brute force could never break through. And maybe that's the most human part of this entire story. Behind every shot, every calculated movement, every tactic that confused Japanese snipers, there was a man carrying grief, responsibility, and purpose. A man who wasn't chasing glory, but survival. A man who didn't care about numbers, only about protecting lives. The American ingenuity in war he embodied wasn't about military pride. It was about the brilliance of a mind refusing to bow to limitation. And once we understand that, we realize his legacy doesn't belong only to the U.S. Marines Pacific Theater. It belongs to anyone who believes that simplicity and genius can coexist. If you feel like you learned something today, if any part of this story helped you see the world with a little more depth, then I sincerely invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and follow the next untold WWII stories, narratives built not just on what happened, but on what human beings are capable of when pushed to the edge. Everything here is crafted with respect for historical records, though some dialogue or descriptions may be adapted to better convey the spirit of these events. What matters is the core truth. Thomas Callahan changed the course of a battlefield using what others would have thrown away. He saw differently, he dared boldly, he thought beyond the obvious. And that kind of vision is something each of us can take into our own lives. Because in the end, Callahan didn't win because he had better weapons. He won because he had better ideas. And ideas, those are the weapons that never rust.